preparation session was in the US and in Canada the last 2 weeks. I'll just give it a try now. I'm going to share my screen, but I think I first need to go to presentation mode. Is that correct? I'm going to share.
If you're encountering any problems, we have backups. I think we can ask our friends to do the presentation for you.
Perfect. I think that works properly. Is that okay?
Okay. Can I ask Robert to take the lead, please?
Already seeing my screen here. Is that correct?
We're seeing two screens actually. Robert, I think
actually I can.
That's perfect.
If you can just take mine, then I think it should work.
I think yours is.
Try to click it. So yeah, innovating for a better world with sustainable aviation fuels. I think, as we all know, one of the key topics to decarbonize the aviation sector and survival of the greenest. I think that's a wonderful title for this important session for our industry. And Sasol EcoFT specifically is producing sustainable aviation fuels with a long-standing history in this field. Johannesburg, South Africa, the company present in the United States. Apparently, I'm just returning from the United States. We have a large plant in Lake Charles in Louisiana. Our headquarters for the Americas in Houston. The company, as said, in 30 countries present, consists of 3 businesses. It's a fully integrated chemicals and energy company with businesses in energy, so specifically in fuels, with our largest footprint operations-wise in South Africa, with operations in Sequoia predominantly. And we have a chemicals business, which is predominantly run in the Americas, in Europe and in Asia, also in China, for example. And we have a long-standing history in fuels with Fischer-Tropsch. That's why our third business is also called EcoFT, where we leverage our more than 70 years of Fischer-Tropsch experience that we started out with coal to liquids more than 70 years ago. And then also transitioned in the last decades via gas to liquids using natural gas as feedstock. And gas to liquids is apparently one of the technologies where you're able to get very clean fuels, aromatics-free fuels, which is an important contributor to reducing also non-CO2 effects with regard to radiative forcing. So getting rid of aromatics helps to reduce contrails, and that's why quite important enabler to decarbonize. That also applies apparently to our new business, EcoFT, leveraging Fischer-Tropsch to produce, for example, power to liquid aviation fuels. And the company all in 18 billion in revenues last year, 3.4 billion in operating profit. And more than 2,000 patents around this technology. That's why it's certainly well positioned to produce sustainable aviation fuels. As a market entry scenario, and certainly that is the major challenge, not only of the aviation industry, but of many industries, heavy industries like chemicals and oil and gas, but also apparently for our customers, the mobility sector. E-fuels are apparently not only an enabler to decarbonize the aviation industry, but also heavy duty trucks, as well as the shipping industry. Will certainly not work, and admitted by the Volkswagen CEO, Mr. Blume, most recently, that e-fuels is also a quite important lever to decarbonize also the automotive industry. So that's why to tackle the energy challenge, we need green fuels. Looking more specifically at the aviation industry, it is an industry consensus that is also agreed and very much driven by ICAO, IATA, and many other bodies, that there are different levers to decarbonize. So we will have some efficiency gains through improved air traffic management, for example, or apparently also driving new technologies. So improved gas turbines and many emissions of the aviation industry, which would increase in the time corridor where we want to stay within the 1.5 degree corridor. With these efficiency gains can only be reduced to a limited extent, which is why biofuels of the first generation are an important lever, but beyond, let's say, the so-called HEFA route, using hydroester fatty acids, HEFA, or so-called used cooking oil or tallow or different other feedstocks, we need to have the so-called refinbles, the fuels of non-biologic origin renewable fuels. So synthetic fuels like will certainly come from SAF, from sustainable aviation fuels. So having said that, was actually the market opportunity or the potential to decarbonize. The industry has consumed, the aviation sector, around 300 million tons of SAF prior to COVID in 2019, and the market forecast is that there will be volumes of 400 to 500 million tons of jet consumed in 2050, with all the market forecasts of the major OEMs. And that's why the question is, what will be and produced, the easier harmonize the ambition to produce 35 targets with blending mandates of up to 65, 68% in 2050. So also quite ambitious, which would then correspond apparently to what we've seen on the previous slide, to decarbonize at 2/3. There are different approaches in the EU, and gearing up to produce more SAF with blending mandates or tax incentive schemes. So different approaches in the EU, rather, let's say, the stick approach, so that you have to pay carbon taxes, and you're to some extent sanctioned as an airline if you don't comply with the existing blending mandates, whereas in the United States there's rather a carrot approach, so that the industry is incentivized with tax harbors and to produce sustainable aviation fuels. So having said that, I already reflected here on the different geographies. As said, the European Union has extensive blending mandates already in place, up to 2/3 of blending mandates with the Refuel EU. And we also anticipate that the EU will now also react to the relatively most recently and newly announced so-called IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which allows, for example, $180 per ton of CO2 that is captured, direct air capture, or up to $1.75 per gallon of e-fuels and clean fuels. So having said that, scarce of fuels, of green fuels, of clean fuels. The so-called HEFA pathway is the one that if you're today trying to source SAF as an airline, you would rather use the so-called HEFA pathway, which is the only one that is industrially, as of now, at larger volumes already available and with increasing volumes. As they are successfully and have since quite some time already prepared themselves to produce SAF via the HEFA pathway. The only, let's say, obstacle that the industry foresees is that the feedstocks of HEFA are rather limited. So the forecasts say that up to 20 million tons of SAF could be produced until 2050 using the HEFA pathway. Yeah? So different feedstocks can be leveraged. Soy and even other feedstocks could with palm oil versus food, and that's why it's really important to see that those fuels should ideally leverage feedstocks that are really sustainable, producing or pathway in the United States from solid waste, MSW is an important one. And then apparently, ultimately, the power to liquid pathway that in its ultimate and ideal constellation would use as a sustainable and the most sustainable carbon source would use direct air capture, thus enabling to reduce the life cycle assessment greenhouse gas reduction potential of up to 99% over the life cycle. So that's certainly the ultimate pathway. That is the one that is predicted to contribute to more than 2/3 in the 2050 scenario to the availability. Having said that, so there is apparently the Fischer-Tropsch technology that is very much now coming into play. It is certainly well positioned to help producing SAF because it's agnostic to both the hydrogen. As said before, Sasol, for example, can use carbon source. It's agnostic, so either using coal, gas, industrial CO2 pathway would then really be direct air capture. So in a nutshell, the different pathways using Fischer-Tropsch can be seen here that either using biomass from forestry or agricultural residues or municipal solid waste can be leveraged. Then apparently these are gasified in a gasifier to produce the carbon monoxide molecule, or we can use direct air capture. Companies like Carbon Engineering or 1.5 and Oxy in the United States are gearing up to now successfully start building the first large industry scale plant in Texas that will then capture and sequester around 1 million tons of CO2 per year. Which is certainly an important lever. However, direct air capture in the current scenarios, those plants at large scale, there's a potential to build around 173 plants in the very best case scenario until 2050, because each of these plants has a capex requirement of around $1 billion. So a major capex impediment to really bring direct air capture to scale, because at the end of the day, that carbon molecule in the ambient or in the classical in the air only has around 400 particles per million. So 400 ppm is certainly the major impediment to use direct air capture at scale. That's why industrial CO2 using, for example, point emitters like cement plants is certainly a major potential, also seen by the ICAO, for example, whereas the European Union is still struggling to accept industrial point emitters beyond 2035, which is currently one of the paramount discussions, very critical for the European Union, because to make those business cases economically viable and bankable, the timeline of 2035 to accept industrial CO2 from point emitters like cement or steel plants would certainly impede the European Union and the point emitters to really leverage that carbon resource. And then apparently the additional capacities in these countries. Just like, for example, I was in Montreal 2 weeks ago. The province of Quebec already now today has 40 gigawatt of renewable electricity as installed base capacity. So that's also a very important lever leveraging that renewable electricity. Looking at Sasso, we have a long-standing, more than 30-year history in producing synthetic fuels from either coal or gas as feedstocks, and we achieved that over the years with multiple STM, and so as a blend of synthetic paraffinic kerosene. And this can also be used because it's aromatics free as a proxy fuel for PTL, sustainable aviation fuel. So we have this long-standing history in South Africa with Sasso. And if it comes to the question, when will this be real? Refer to one of the plants that we are currently commissioning. Here, for example, in Uzbekistan, I had the chance to visit that plant 4 weeks ago. That is based in the south of Uzbekistan near Kashi. Very impressive because it's a model plant that exists in that, let's say, scale, and also the layout of the plant that is certainly unique in the whole world. That is a GTL plant, a gas to liquids plant. Two reactors you can see in the background with a capacity of altogether 38,000 barrels per day. So we can bring this up to 1.6 million tons of products, including apparently jet fuel. So certainly a big lever. It always depends on the catalyst. That's why we are also able, as Sasso, using a next generation catalyst, and so we can increase the yield of SAF to up to 82%. There are a couple of projects that we're currently launching in the European Union. One of them is in using biomass as feedstock together with a partner that is the company Uniper. Another project that we in Germany using a cement plant with the international cement producer Cemex. Another project that we've announced is in the city of Hamburg together with Siemens Energy, Uniper, and Airbus. Airbus also apparently using the SAF for delivery flights, for ferry flights. So that's also a quite interesting landmark project and asset. What is really important is to use a catalyst that is enables to increase the yield of sustainable aviation fuels to up to 80%, which will be the industry benchmark with our latest next generation catalyst development, because it's apparently a green premium product. German Chancellor most recently started to launch a project with us in our headquarters in Sassel place in Johannesburg, and we are currently developing a consortium of multiple research institutes like Fraunhofer, KIT, and Helmholtz, the development of this next generation catalyst. Apparently, we're also working together with OEMs like here Deutsche Aircraft, but also with Boeing and Airbus to certify this PTL, sustainable aviation fuel. And that's a journey where we are currently leveraging, apparently, as a proxy fuel, the GTL-derived Fischer-Tropsch synthetic paraffinic kerosene. So that's Sassel in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Dr. Sachs, thank you ever so much. Very interesting. A lot of questions probably. And if there are any questions, please do have them on the chat at the end of the whole session. They will be forwarded to me, and I will forward them to our panelists. Thank you ever so much for the interesting presentation. Our next panelist on this panel is Dr. Johan Kos. He's the Principal Research and Development Engineer at Royal Netherlands Aerospace Center, that is NLR. So I'd like to leave the floor to Dr. Johan Kos, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. So I would like to speak about the impact of alternative fuels and novel propulsion. It's about a project a research project we carried out. NLR. NLR is the Dutch Center for Aerospace Research, and TU Delft. We cooperated with them, and in particular with their biotechnology department.
Dr. Kos, we cannot see you.
Oh, I have to share my screen still. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll share my screen.
And we'd like to see you as well as.
Yeah. That's fine.
Thank you.
I can arrange that as well. That is this, and now I have to turn on the video. Yeah.
Thank you.
You can see everything now.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let me see if it works here well. Okay, let me see. Yeah, okay, it works. So the work has been done in a project funded by the European through the Clean Sky 2 program. So the work was focused on how would air transport, how could it look like in 2050, and what does that mean for the environment, and how does that contribute to the European Green Deal, and then also how to come there. What is the roadmap for novel propulsion and alternative fuels to come to these benefits in 2050? So, well, I don't have to explain much on this slide because it was already nicely, very well and in much more detail introduced in the previous presentation. But to say that here in Transcend, we focused on the sustainable aviation fuels, both the bio and waste-based one and synthetic one. And we also considered hydrogen as a fuel. And I think it's useful to notice that if we're talking about hydrogen, we are referring then to green hydrogen. And but this is also a feedstock to produce synthetic SAF. Then in terms of emissions, we will talk about gross emissions and net emissions. So gross emissions is the emissions that come from the tailpipe of the aircraft. And net emissions, we take into account that the carbon that's used was coming from the sustainable biomass or recycled or coming from air. And in terms of technology, we'll focus a bit more also on the propulsion technology and the aircraft technology. And clearly with the sustainable aviation fuels, they can already be used in blends. But for the hydrogen, it's not possible to do that with present propulsion, and really novel propulsion is absolutely needed. And there are very good reasons to have also propulsion improvements for even in combination with SAF. So we looked at a number of propulsion concepts, went into the detailed literature study to see the opportunities there. And this is just a very short summary and of the 7 propulsion concepts that we went into in much more detail. So we can use a look at the usual combustion type of engines based on gas turbines and in combination with SAF. We look at the hydrogen-based combustion, and other hydrogen variants, namely in combination with electric fuel cells, or the hybrid hydrogen. That are the ones that we will focus on. And there are, of course, a few other alternatives mentioned here, but we will not go into that detail. In terms of application with hydrogen, it's typically for and electric flight. It's typically for the somewhat smaller aircraft, but you can even go up to twin aisle configurations for short distances. So then we started, we want to evaluate the impact on the fleet level on the transport fleet. So we start with this propulsion technology and evaluate them, what their gross emissions at the aircraft level. So we did that and there is done in 2 ways. The one is we take concepts, aircraft concepts with novel propulsion as being modeled, as being investigated by the Clean Sky, European Clean Sky 2 program. And well, in this European Clean Sky 2 program, it's all about propulsion based on fossil kerosene. Here we will look at the use of sustainable aviation fuels, but of course it does not change very much in the gross emissions. And the advantage of the Clean Sky 2 aircraft is that they are much more energy efficient than present aircraft, and so that is an advantage in terms of reducing the impact on the environment. Then as a second type of aircraft, we looked at hydrogen-powered aircraft. We took a number of these Clean Sky 2 aircraft concepts and rebuilt that to hydrogen-powered aircraft. We modeled that type of aircraft. We checked the modeling and the assumptions with a group of experts from industrial partners, from academics and research organizations, and we evaluated that with our MAS tool, which is used for evaluation of powertrains in the context of an aircraft. So that is based on, this has been done for 3 types of aircraft representing the seat classes, which you can see there. So it's based on an ATR-42, an A320neo and a Boeing 787-8 with different type of hydrogen propulsion technology, fuel cell for the smallest, pure hydrogen combustion for the largest, and a hybrid configuration combining the fuel cell and the gas turbine for both. And then we do that for shorter design ranges than usual, and with the normal number of passengers, and with entry into service in 2035 for the first 2 and 2040 for the last one. And here you see an example of an artist impression of the SMR, the variant for the 151 to 176 class. What you can see, the fuel tanks are in the back, modeled to be in the back, and as a consequence, the center of gravity shifts backwards, which has been modeled by also the wings have to be replaced more backwards. And of course, also it has to be taken into account to what extent these wings have to be changed. So that we applied then these results we used for the whole seat classes from 20 to 300 seats by using some interpolation. And then to go to the impact on the global emissions, we used traffic scenarios from literature. And so these traffic scenarios is indicated here. As you see, the number of flights is growing from close to 40 million to above the 62 million. This is quite a specific traffic scenario, in which you also see that in this traffic scenario, the number of large aircraft is growing considerably. And that is due to the fact that in this scenario, the number of airports is not really growing. It has been seen as a restriction in this scenario that the airport capacity is not really increasing. This traffic scenario was given to us to be used in the project, so we have no particular reason to choose this one. But well, this is the traffic scenario. We could also have applied, of course, it for other traffic scenarios. Then on the fleet level, what we see is comparing two scenarios. The one is with the Clean Sky 2 aircraft, so with technology improvements and SAF for 100%, no blending, or introducing in this scenario also a hydrogen aircraft for the 20 to 300 seats with short ranges. And we see globally, if we introduce that globally, a gross emissions reduction in 2050, which is 20% more due to the use of hydrogen aircraft. And with only a slight increase of gross energy consumption, and of course, reducing hydrogen aircraft, there will be more emission of water. Next, we also considered the fuels, and you see here we made a selection of promising production routes. Also was done in a number of questionnaires and workshops with experts, and that came out as the HEFA, the Fischer-Tropsch, the fast pyrolysis and alcohol to jet as most promising for the bio-based fuels, power to liquid for the also Fischer-Tropsch based and for synthetic fuels, and alkaline electrolysis for the green hydrogen. More information on this has been published on our project website. So then we look to the alternative fuels to the roadmap, and in that sense we look to availability, and we also look to economic aspects. I will talk a bit more about availability now, and that we restricted to a scenario only of flights departing EU plus UK, and we looked at the availability, and we also used the green hydrogen as first priority for the hydrogen powered aircraft, and the remainder as feedstock for the synthetic SAF. And we also took into account that these feedstock will be used for aviation fuels, but also for other fuels or even other non-energy use of green hydrogen. And then we see in terms of the hydrogen supply, that's all quite fine until 2050, even with the 95% use for non-aviation purposes, and some slight import from neighboring countries, and contributing to a reduction of 40 megatons of CO2. If we look to the SAF, it's a bit different. We see that the bio-based is increasing, but hardly. Of supply, and specifically hydrogen-powered propulsion. But for the SAF, we see that the proposed targets can be met up to 2030, still provided there are sufficient production facilities. Of course, but the prognosis for production facilities is typically not for such a long period. And with the growing gap after 2030, and that there is a potential of a reduction up to 40% for net CO2 equivalent emissions, greenhouse gas emissions until 2050, based on a technology-driven demand in a hydrogen-powered aircraft scenario, comparing that with fossil kerosene. We have some additional results available, which will appear in probably next week, on the economic viability of the fuel and the energy needed for fuel production, comparing the hydrogen-powered aircraft with non-hydrogen. We see a scenario. We see typically that the cost of hydrogen is expected to be lower, and the energy needed is also lower. So another advantage of moving towards the introduction of hydrogen-powered aircraft. And we will publish a number of strategic recommendations to pave the way towards 2050. Thank you.
Dr. Kost, thank you ever so much. I think you have some other obligations that you are on your way. Thank you. So if there are any questions, we will be more than happy to forward them to you afterwards. And thank you once again for your contribution, and have a great day. Our next panelist is going to be from Politecnico di Torino, Professor Paolo Meggiore. Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ilmazgaya. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for your introduction. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see you loud and clear. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So it was a little bit, let me say, trouble to define the title for my presentation. Stating my experience and my past experience, I decided to focus the fuel cells application to the general aviation and ultralight aircraft. This would be useful neglect, but in my opinion, it would have an impact on the way to design our society integrating different activities and technologies in a shared environment, shared and complex environment. This presentation, moreover, will discuss the most.
Steven needs to submit it.
I'm sorry, please. Most suitable application of the hydrogen technology, in particular fuel cells, to power fleets of small aircraft and vehicles in terms of integration inside a complex environment. I'd like the most useful aspects in terms of reducing the impact of pollution on the environment. I will also make a brief review on the aerospace projects involving hydrogen technology in which the Politecnico di Torino has been involved, and those that are still in progress and would be give some interest discussing point, keeping the title of this panel that says roles and perspectives of technology providers. So many considerations that will be made in this presentation are taken from this authoritative general reference, no says to discuss Clean Sky and European programs, and to evaluate the environmental benefits of new aeronautical technologies. Several concept aircraft, we say Clean Sky 2 platforms, have been defined as well as their reference counterpart for comparison. That means state-of-the-art aircraft from 2014. And these concept models are addressing the four major market segments, namely long-range aircraft, medium range, regional, and commuter and business jet, and let me say general aviation aircraft. I will focus on this track, I will focus on this segment, and we can see that we are on the right track just to reduce the impact. These are measured on this platform that I mentioned before, but usually we concentrate our interest in CO2 and nitrous oxide is produced by engines. But I would underline another neglected important point in terms of impact on humans. This means unburned hydrocarbons and byproduct by the combustion inside the engines. They are often produced and released by air engines when they are running out of speed, when they are using close to the ground during the takeoff, during the APU operations, during the taxi on ground. And this is a quite big issue, especially in the northern part of Italy, where we have suffering common weather stasis. And the general aviation airports are usually close to the cities, to the villages, and this increases the impact of these chemicals on the population. And this is why I focused my presentation on this segment of aircraft. Here we have some byproduct from engine combustion, and you can say that the allowable level are so low. Another figure from authoritative sources in terms of levels of exposition of the population depending on the concentration of pollutants. So, I'm sorry, this one. I presented this schematic. This is a sustainable general scheme application of hydrogen technology, in particular focusing on fleets operating near the villages and towns and cities, where the hydrogen is conveniently produced by electrolysis from the surplus of unused grid power. This is a key aspect that enforces the fuel cells application to supply the operation of fleets and to increase the easiness of management of the electrical power grid. In particular, the focus of my presentation will be addressing to the aerospace application, but I will connect the aerospace application to the transportation, speaking about of small fleets of small vehicles. In this big picture, you can notice this meaning. These are suitable application of hydrogen fuel cells for aerospace and transportation. In particular, we are already on the track for small vehicles that are not managed, let me say, in a fleet style. And we have the general aircraft and the UAV drones fleets that are the size that for a suitable application of hydrogen and fuel cells. Then, as shown in figure, grid balancing has become even more significant in recent years with huge cities with integrated activities, with the inclusion of renewable energy sources such as photovoltaic and so on, hydro electricity generation, and the integration with national grid networks and so on. For this reason, storing the excess of energy produced as hydrogen offers an important option. We can store indefinitely the gaseous hydrogen, and this would help the management of the electrical grids. And we can prevent energy losses, as useful appears in the electricity management of grids. So the hydrogen would be useful also for the power grid management. Some figures about the prediction of a cost for hydrogen production. The figure shows that the prediction of hydrogen, the prediction on cost values of hydrogen would be interesting in the next 10 years. The numerical values are derived from different studies. I present a couple of them, and you can notice that also the fuel cell costs are foreseen for a decrease in the next few years. What about the storage? Speaking about the onboard storage, not for production station and distribution station on ground, the best solution is physical storage by, as the previous panelist has mentioned before, compressed tanks and liquid cryogenic tanks. Even if this form offer some opportunities, but some drawbacks in terms of logistic management and boiling off and safety issues. We have also a chemical storage of hydrogen. This would be useful for small aircraft, in particular for drones and unmanned vehicles, We have different technologies. This is not interesting to go inside this technicalities. In this table, a comparison of hydrogen storage methods is shown, and generally for commercial aviation, this means large aircraft and medium aircraft, and for more general large application, cryogenic tanks that can store liquid hydrogen continue to remain the most attractive storage method, speaking about hydrogen, obviously. And it provides high hydrogen content for low weight and low volume capacities. And this means it's useful for large energy storage. And then hydride and in particular gaseous storage methods are impractical for the excessive of weight and volume of the tanks, apart for small aircraft, where the total amount of energy obviously is relatively low. Aircraft and, let me say, small vehicles, ground vehicles that would be integrated in a certain type of operations. Another some figures about the problem in terms of density. This means the quantity of hydrogen as a percentage of the storage medium. And you can notice that the compressed gas offers the best density, avoiding the logistic problems of the liquefying hydrogen. Another important issues, as has been discussed by the previous panelists, the figures show that hydrogen production growth for the following decades and the share of the hydrogen fuels by sector by 2050, I'm sorry. According to this alternative report, it's obvious that the majority of hydrogen production are released with low carbon technologies, and we consider that for aviation, speaking about commercial aviation, the solution is the synthetic fuel. It's not possible to apply the hydrogen in a large 2-hydrogen liner. Coming back to small aircraft and in particular UAV drones application, you can consider that the polymer exchange membrane fuel cell technology is the most suitable for several aspects, in particular the temperatures and the easiness of the transient management during the thrusting level changing in piloting. And you consider the storage type of the hydrogen on board and the endurance. That means if you increase the endurance and the mass of the aircraft, you can shift from the battery to the fuel cell application, from the electrical battery to the fuel cells application in terms of weight opportunities, saving weight opportunities. Okay, this is the scenario in which I will describe now some reduce the little review of research activities that has been performed in Politecnico di Torino. In particular, we started in 2005 to testing the fuel cells behavior at high altitude, just to consider the effect of humidity, pressure, and temperatures on the fuel cells performances. Then we moved on the testing on board, and we have produced in 2007 this APU, auxiliary power unit for general aviation aircraft, in particular for ultralight aircraft. And the tests were performed, and we supplied energy for some systems on board using compressed hydrogen. This has been compressed gas bottle at 20 megapascals and polymer membrane exchange fuel cells. And then we moved to the propulsion of a large model of a glider. This test has been performed in 2008, still using compressed gas in a metal hydride bottle and fuel cells by PEM technology. And then we moved to the research on opportunities to increase the performances of fuel cells. In particular, we performed studies to remove the traditional graphite plates with the stainless steel equivalent. We performed some studies, and we developed some prototypes of these metal plates. And then we launched an interesting program, the SkySpark program. In 2009, in occasion of the World Air Games in Turin, we flew on this aircraft. It is an ultralight aircraft that we have modified with the help of the producer of the aircraft. And you can see the general arrangement of the tank, of the fuel cell stacks. This was a integration on board of a traditional aircraft, and this required a lot of changes that were a little bit costly and complicated. We tested the electrical propulsion without the fuel cell stacks in June 9, 29. This was the maiden flight in Turin to test the electrical power line with batteries, and we tested on ground the hydrogen propulsion. Then we stopped the program as the cost for university team wasn't bearable. Then from this heritage, we moved to the ongoing research activities that are still on track. We cooperate on these activities with some companies. I have put these logos on this slide, and I give some suggestion to small medium enterprises just to increase their capacities to supply the hydrogen technology for this type of application: small vehicles and small aircraft interconnecting on grid near to airports, near to cities, near to flight clubs. The first program is the hydrogen production, storage, and distribution station. On this project, we are conceiving the integration, as I said before, of an aircraft fleet integrating with a ground vehicle fleet for logistic distribution, just to design the requirements in terms of hydrogen production and storage, and to increase the use and the usage profile of hydrogen, reducing the storage on ground for the servicing of these fleets. And then another interesting activities that we are developing now is that the development of some components for the, as an example, the electrical pump, recirculating pump that solved some problems in terms of nitrogen pollution of the fuel cell stack. And we're developing this recirculating pumps by regenerative technology that allows us some advantages in terms of reduction of weight and power for this recirculation of the unused hydrogen on board of the fuel cells. And now we have another interesting set of activities, the onboard gazocytogen regulation and monitoring. This means safety issues and reducing the weight and the complexity of a system on board. We're working on the hydrogen flow regulating valves by Collins Aerospace Microtecnica, for example, and in-tank one-step pressure regulator that reduces the pressure, the air pressure level to the level useful for the fuel cells proper working. Another interesting subject is related to hydrogen quick disconnect filling valves by Jointech. This is a joint program that we're developing with Jointech company. And then this is a research of the Politecnico di Torino and Photonex laboratories, the use of pressure sensors of a specific technology, optical FBG sensor, to measure the pressures, the temperatures, and the humidity inside the tank. And then using the same technology, optical fibers, to implement some functions in terms of diagnosis and prognosis of the structures of the tank and of the leakage of hydrogen, just to prevent safety issues during the operations. So these are some examples of technologies that would be developed to increase from the vehicle aircraft point of view, the integration of proper fleets of small aircraft inside the hydrogen economy for transportation. This will be a useful example for the small, medium enterprises, and why not for large companies to cooperate with Politecnico di Torino or other university on this subject. This is another opportunity. We are going outside the aircraft, the aviation, and we're moving to the moon exploration. We are performing some studies for the support of astronauts and more easily the automated vehicle operations on ground of the moon, using the fuel cells technology applied in a regenerative and renewable vision, where the sun power allow us to electrolyze the small amount of water just to produce the byproduct oxygen and hydrogen, and to produce electrical energy inside the fuel cells to supply these operations. The fuel cells are a good alternative to the most aggressive, let me say, use of radionuclides and nuclear power station that are foreseen for the support of these complex operations. So this that's all. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm available for questions and whatever.
Professor Maggiore, thank you ever so much. Very interesting. I don't know if we are going to see if there is something going on on the moon. With my age, I don't think I can, but I wish everything will go well. So thank you ever so much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I looked at the chat. I don't see any questions, but I have one question for the remaining panelists, who's Mr. Sachs, Dr. Sachs, and Professor There's a lot of things going on the academia side, and there's also a lot of need on the industry side. So my question goes to Dr. Sachs and my good Professor Maggiore. What should be the strategy to make sure that these two entities, academia and industry, work together for reaching the carbon neutral aviation goals in the next 10, 20 years? So maybe the professor would like to take the first shot, then I'll give the floor to Mr. Sachs.
I'm sorry, who is the first?
You are the first, sir.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. It's difficult to answer to this question. I guess that this means we have some European programs, Clean Sky as an example, that offer useful opportunities for this cooperation, but often these huge programs are led by the major, let me say, producer of aircraft or industrial application. This is good, but I guess I have a good heritage of collaboration with Centro Estero per l'Internazionalizzazione Piemonte that collects small, medium enterprises and that put them in contact with academia. This will be a useful alternative to the huge, let me say, mainstream to increase the cooperation with the academia and small and medium enterprises that are really useful to develop some technologies that are less attractive for huge multinational, international companies. This is a useful suggestion, in my opinion.
Thank you. This is very useful. I think let's hear what Dr. Sachs is going to talk about this on industry side. I think from our point of view, we have clusters which has the ability to put together SMEs, large companies, and at the same time academia together. So that could be a great suggestion from your side. Dr. Sachs, how would you just answer this one? How can academia work with industry, sir?
Yeah, that is an absolutely great question, Yalcin. So from my point of view, the close collaboration between academia and industry is key to success. Why? Because apparently academia can explore new ideas and do trials at lowest cost to pilot new technologies, whilst the industry then needs to de-risk together with academia those new technologies, emerging technologies, and bring them to industrial scale to come to high volumes of green product and green molecules and green electrons apparently needed to produce green molecules. That's why it only works apparently in a close collaboration that industry and large industrial players leverage really the know-how, the expertise at lab scale from academia. So this can only be done together. Then second of all, academia needs to be in place to bring in the scientific content for science-based targets that we are all pursuing. So unless we leverage the expertise from academia to substantiate the industrial rollout of large-scale plants to produce green molecules and electrons, it needs to be within the corridor and those constraints. The corridor is always defined by academia. That's why industry can only comply with science-based targets if academia brings in actually exactly that expertise. So that we are really pursuing reasonable targets, and that we are, as an industry, we are challenged by and science, that we are acting within the compliant boundary conditions or constraints defined by academia. Life cycle analysis is of essence. So, for example, if we wanted to induce a new propulsion fuel like hydrogen in the aviation industry, life cycle analysis needs to be pulled, need to be leveraged to really analyze what would be the overall impact on the industry, because we need to replicate, duplicate infrastructures. So it's not only about having, for example, an electric vehicle like a Tesla in place. We need to look at the life cycle analysis results. What does it take to build all the battery factories? How much electricity is needed to produce and to recycle batteries and to charge batteries. So it doesn't help at all if coal-fired power plants are used and leveraged to charge all those EVs in the world. The same applies apparently to hydrogen planes. What does it really take to start duplicating the infrastructure? And so on and so on. That's why I think academia is absolutely of essence to also challenge the industry to stay within the right corridors for achievable targets and to really make them actionable, and then use apparently industry to bring those technologies to scale.
Dr. Sachs, thank you. Thank you so much. I think from both sides, we need each other, academia and the industry. I think this is a great time to work together at the same time. So I don't think there are any more questions, and we are not too bad with the timing. We passed 10 minutes. So I think I'd like to leave the floor to my good friend who's representing EACP, Robert Weiss, and I will say a few words at the end. Robert, would you like to just say something on behalf of EACP, please? Thank you.
Of course. Thank you a lot, Yalcin. Yes, on behalf of EACP, both of the coordinator, Mr. Niklas Schilling, and of the network itself. So on behalf of all 45 clusters from 17 different regions across Europe, I would really like to express my gratitude to both the speakers that have been great today, who gave a lot of insight and a lot of useful information, and to the audience which participated, who brought their time with us and listened to all the very relevant information that have been disseminated throughout these two panels. I would like to give a brief outlook on the following 2 days. Starting from this afternoon, the B2B sessions are open. We have currently 155 registered participants. So we really hope that the B2B engine is able to connect the best possible matches in between possible cooperation partners in the future. So we are really looking forward to hearing from you the feedback, if everything worked out as you have imagined it, if you have hoped so. And we wish everyone a great continuation of the event. Yalcin?
Well, thank you. There's not much that I can add. The only thing, last but not the least, is an invitation from the heart to everyone who's willing to, come to Turkey, visit Istanbul. That goes to also to our good friends from Airbus. So whoever is in need of anything, we're ready to support them. So thank you ever so much for the panelists, great presentations, and also for the participants. It was a successful event, at least from our side, and we look forward to having other events in the future. So look after yourselves, take care, and we'll see you sometime soon. Have a great day. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you. Bye-bye.